So Detroit is special because it is the gateway to freedom. It sits on an international border with another country. And that helped to form the black community in the city of Detroit in the 1800s. So the African American community in the city of Detroit is intimately tied to freedom fighting. That is really how the community was really created, how it was formed, how it developed, how it grew, was out of this fight for freedom. And the fact that it sits on the international border is vital to that history. So that's what makes Detroit different than many other cities that have a significant African American population. Detroit's black community is really formed at this precipice of slavery and freedom. So in the 1700s, you have Africans who are enslaved in the city of Detroit by French and British slave owners and landowners in the city of Detroit. By the 1800s, you have a vital and vibrant freedom movement going on in the city of Detroit, which creates this black community, which is founded on this fight for freedom. They create the first black institutions, the first black churches, black businesses, black organizations. And by the time we get to the Great Migration, so African Americans in 1910, the 1910 census, 95% of all African Americans lived in a southern state. In the 1970 census, 55% of African Americans lived somewhere other than a southern state. That time period in between is what we call the Great Migration, when over half of the black community left the South. They went west, they went east, and they came here to Detroit, to the Midwest. In fact, Detroit will grow as a percentage of its black population higher than any of the other cities. So it won't have as many people as Chicago or New York or LA, but its percentage in African American growth outstrips all of those cities. African American population grows over 1,000% in the years between 1910 and 1960. So that is a major change that happens in the city of Detroit. And that culture is going to be a major part of Detroit's history, starting with that foundational culture, fighting for freedom, which will be added by these Southern black folks who come during the high point of the auto industry. So one of the reasons why African Americans are coming to the city of Detroit from the South is because Henry Ford has offered $5 a day to all workers in 1914. After he begins hiring African Americans at this high wage, well, the other auto industries, the other auto factories have to compete with Ford. So they have to begin extending jobs to African Americans. So Packard and Dodge and Fisher Brothers, Cadillac, all of the other car companies began hiring African Americans. And so now you got thousands of African Americans coming to the city of Detroit. They're going to be met with the institutions that the freedom fighters created in the 1800s. So the churches that they first meet when they come to the city of Detroit are from those foundational churches: Second Baptist, the oldest black church in the state of Michigan; Bethel AME, the mother church of all of the black Methodist churches in the city of Detroit; and St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, the Anglican or Episcopalian church that is the black foundation, particularly for the black middle class in the city of Detroit. And so you got these institutions. They're going to be now joined by thousands of African Americans who come to the city of Detroit during the Great Migration. Now you have African Americans making a living wage, much more money than they could be making as a sharecropper or a tenant farmer in Mississippi or Alabama. And so now they're going to be able to do two things. One, they're going to be able to be customers, patrons of businesses that they never would have been able to be patrons of as a sharecropper in Mississippi, as a low-paid or no-pay worker in the South. They can go into business because now they have the wherewithal, they have the resources that, yes, they work at Ford, but they are a tailor, or they're a baker, or they're a chef, or they know how to do carpentry, or they know how to do painting. So they can use in their free time this other business. They leave the auto factories and working for other people and begin to start their own businesses. This helps to create this black business environment, which will be centered in the Lower East Side neighborhood known as Paradise Valley. So by the 1920s and 30s, you have 350 black-owned businesses in the Lower East Side, just north of Black Bottom. Black Bottom is the residential area primarily, and then Paradise Valley is the business district and entertainment district that's mostly non-residential. There are some residents, but overwhelmingly it's businesses and entertainment. Well, all of this is a product of the coming together of two groups of people. the freedom fighters who set up the first black institutions in the city of Detroit in the 1800s, and the people coming from during the Great Migration, particularly for jobs in the auto industry from after 1910 up until particularly World War II. A black community that will have music as a foundation, that will have art as a foundation, business and law and medicine. All of this is growing in the city of Detroit and the African American community because of the coming together of these two major foundational groups of people in the city of Detroit. One of the reasons why we have a Detroit is because there were some people already here before this was Detroit. And so the Anishinaabe people, who are, you may also know them as the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe people are the Odawa, which many times is called the Ottawa, the Ojibwe, which the French will corrupt to Chippewa, and the Potawatomi, which are also known as the Potawatomi. These indigenous groups of people, there are other groups of people in the city of Detroit or in Michigan too, other indigenous groups. But these are the three largest groups, and they're part of the Anishinaabe. And so it's the river itself, and it's also the coast of the river, where some people have settled, or they do their hunting and their fishing. And so the indigenous people are already here. And they're here way before 1701. But of course, 1701 is when Antoine de la Mothe Lomet Cadillac comes to the city of Detroit and builds Fort Pontchartrain du Detroit. Now, part of that fur trade is trading with these indigenous people. So one of the reasons why he's here is to do trading with these people who are already here. So part of the reason that there is a Detroit is because there were already people here before this was Detroit. So the French arrived, led by Cadillac. They will create a fur trading fort, Fort Pontchartrain du Detroit, named after the Comte de Pontchartrain, Jerome Philippe, who is the Comte de Pontchartrain. It's named after him because when you pay for something, you get your name on it. And that's still a tradition in the city of Detroit. Wealthy people pay for stuff and they get their name put on it. And so that starts in 1701 when they fund the building of this fort, which will be a fur trading fort. So now when the French are here to set up this fur trading fort, well, they're going to be trading with each other, of course, but they're also going to be trading with these Native Americans. They're trading with these Native Americans, but they're knee deep in a different trade besides the fur trade, which is the slave trade. And their major slave trading centers are in the Caribbean, Saint-Domingue, in Martinique, Guadeloupe. This is where the French are doing much of their slave trading at, and they're enslaving Africans on sugar plantations in the Caribbean. And the British are doing the same thing, the Spanish are doing the same thing, the Dutch, the Danish, the Portuguese are doing it in Brazil. So all of the other European groups are involved in the slave trade, but the French are also here in the city of Detroit. They're having the fur trade, but they're knee deep in the slave trade, so they're gonna bring slavery with them. And so now you're gonna have Africans in the city of Detroit enslaved by the French, the wealthy landowning French. And we know many of their names. We know names like Jean Rivard. We say Rivard Street in the city of Detroit, but Jean Rivard is one of those landowners who was also a slave owner. Antoine Beaubien, we say Beaubien in Detroit, slave owner in the city of Detroit. Alexander Shin, we say Shane, and Shane is a slave owner. Jean-Francois Hamtramck, we say Hamtramck, he's a slave owner in the city of Detroit. Francois Livernois, we say Livernois in the city of Detroit. And Livernois is a slave owner in the city of Detroit. He's a French slave owner. So this history that brings the French here to have a fur trade also brings Africans here because they're enslaved by the French, which will, of course, when the French lose control of the city of Detroit to the British during the 7 Years' War, the British wealthy people will also be slave owners in the city of Detroit. We have their names too, James Abbott, Elijah Brush, William McComb. The largest slave owner in Michigan's history is William McComb. So the British are slave owners, the French are slave owners, and then this becomes part of the United States under the Northwest Ordinance in 1787. It becomes part of the United States. But all of that history is connected, and you wouldn't have this core group of black people here if it wasn't for two things. One, the fact that the French and British are slave owners, and number two, we sit at an international border next to a country that is out of the jurisdiction of the fugitive slave laws of the United States.